there are only 2 people, let's just wait for a few minutes until 5 pass. And if there's nobody, we have to get started. Yeah. Did I scare you in the first lecture?
Oh, I actually missed the first one.
Oh, you missed the first one?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. You were in the first one. Did I scare you?
No.
No? Oh, it's too difficult. The module is too difficult, or too long, or for some reason.
It was okay.
It's new, because that was the first time I was hearing something. So new to me.
It's new to you. I hope it's not too difficult. You're scared because it's too difficult. You don't want to come.
No, it's not.
No?
I don't think so.
Okay, good. Because I'm trying to keep it as simple, basic in the first lecture. I don't want to make it too complicated to frustrate you.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting subject. It's not complicated, and it should be your advantage as international students, right? So most of your other courses, I don't think there are many. They consider many diversity, cultures, nationalities. You know where you're from. I think this is very practical, and a module that would get everybody interested, right?
Yeah.
So,
Hopefully.
do you have you just start the new semester? You shouldn't have any deadlines, right? That's weird. They're all online. 31 online. Well,
Oh, I think that's the problem.
31.
I think, are we supposed to, we thought it's a lecture.
No, it's here in this room.
It's here, right?
Yeah.
It's all the people in here.
Oh, that's why. Oh dear.
Oh.
Lecture series are full.
Alright.
Yeah. I'll give a shout.
Yeah, everyone's
I was curious why. Where are the others? I was not
yeah, we literally just go through the online classes. Why are they here?
Why? I don't know why they came to this room last.
But the time says lecture 4, right? Lecture 3 or lecture 4.
Oh.
Yeah, today we're
Lecture 3.
Oh my God, it's wrong. You know, timetable is wrong.
Oh, so we did.
Timetabling mistakes. My timetable always lecture series 4.
Oh.
In the same room, never change, never ever change. Here you go. Oh dear. Thank you for letting me know. I'm so frustrated. I need to speak to the timetabling team, and I'll ask them why do they make this mistake. Waste all of our time. I feel so much better when I see all of you. Yeah, so much better. And I hope you don't mind. We're gonna finish a little bit later. I hope you don't mind because we're changing room. They wasted our time. And I'm going to talk about coursework, formative coursework today anyway. Oh God. I guess that's everybody, right? That's everyone. Uh, I don't know what to say, but I don't know the right time frame in different rooms. That's terrible. Okay, let's just get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to our second session on global business. So today we're going to look at international trade and government intervention. So by the end of today's session, you should be able to explain and apply international trade theories in your own analysis. You should be able to explain and justify why do countries trade and how do countries improve their competitive advantage. Finally, you should be able to explain how do governments influence international trade through formal institutions. So before I get started, anyway, by the way, if you want to register your attendance, this is the QR code for today's session. I'll wait for a few minutes. Okay. So we're done? We're done. Okay, good. Right, before I get started, I want each of you to think about your own country for 1 minute and think about the famous multinational firms originally from your country. And you can also think about the product, services, or even natural resources that your country is famous for. Think about the famous multinational firms, famous products, services, or natural resources that your country is famous for. Okay, why do countries trade? So there are several early trade theories that provide the rationale for countries to engage in international trade. So we first have this so-called mercantilism or neo-mercantilism, because in old days, countries received payment in gold for export. So export effectively increased the country's gold stock, whereas import reduced it because import were paid with gold. So export were seen as good, but import as bad. So because a nation's power and strength increases as its wealth increases, so the mercantilism theory argues that national prosperity results from a positive balance achieved by maximizing export and minimizing or even impeding imports. So even today, many people still believe running a trade surplus, that is to export more than import, is beneficial. So these people subscribe to a view so-called neo-mercantilism. So for example, labor unions who want to protect home country jobs, the farmers who want to keep their crop prices high, or even certain manufacturers who rely heavily on exports. Yeah. So these people all tend to support the neo-mercantilism. However, the mercantilism actually discourage the import of raw materials and inputs or other, parts or components. Okay, so it harms the interest of importers, mercantilism. And also mercantilism harms the interest of customers because export restrictions reduce the variety or choices of products, leading to higher prices for customers. Okay, so this is the mercantilism and neo-mercantilism. Then we have the so-called free trade theory. So the free trade theory argues that free trade is in general superior, should lead the following outcomes. So for example, companies and customers are more ready to buy products they want, and imported products are much cheaper than domestically produced products because access to world-class supply forces prices down, or these imported products are originally made in lower-cost countries. Okay, and so low-cost imports actually reduce the expenses of companies, thereby raising their profit, which can be passed on to workers in the form of higher wages. And low-cost imports also reduce the expenses of customers, thereby increasing their living standards. So unrestricted international free trade generally increase the prosperity of poor countries because they have more opportunity to sell their product to rich countries in order to generate income, which will help them get out of poverty. So this is a free trade theory and explain the motivation for countries to engage in international trade. Now, before I move on to the next two theories, I'm going to introduce a very important concept in international trade, which is called comparative advantage. It's also called the country-specific advantage. So bearing in mind, comparative advantage is only at country level. Okay, there's no so-called forum comparative advantage. Yeah, comparative advantage is only at country level. So it includes imperative or natural resources such as labor, arable land, climate, or petroleum reserves, such as those enjoyed by the Gulf nations. The other types of comparative advantage can be acquired over time, such as entrepreneurial orientation, availability of venture capital, and innovation capacity. Okay? So the comparative advantage refers to the superior features of a country that provided with unique benefit in global competition. It's a foundation concept of international trade that explains how countries can achieve and sustain their economic success and prosperity. The comparative advantage can be derived either from natural endowment or deliberate national policies. So I'll give you some examples of comparative advantage. Then you tell me whether they are derived from natural endowment or deliberate national policies. So for example, France has a superior, France has a climate and a soil superior for producing wine. It's a natural endowment or government policy.
Originally a natural endowment.
Yes, it's a natural endowment. Are you with me? Okay, if you don't know, raise your hand now, I'll explain. Saudi Arabia has a natural abundance of oil superior for producing petroleum products. Natural endowment or national policy? Natural endowment, good.
Sorry, so does it ever be the case where it's a little bit of both? So in the case of France, I know that they protect a lot of their winery fields, and that's done through national law. So
it could be a combination.
So it can be a combination.
It can be a combination.
Deliberate natural
it's
policies.
intertwining, sometimes. But originally, in the first place, they have the natural abundance. Yeah. Okay. Over time, Japan acquired a superior base of knowledge and experience for producing cars. National policy or national endowment? National policy, yes. So over time, India acquired a superior base of IT workers for producing computer software. Policy, excellent. Now, think about the comparative advantage of your home country. Think about it. Think about it. You can discuss with your neighbors. Then I will ask. Okay, you have to think about it because now, from the first lecture, more or less around your nationalities. Then I will go one by one. You're going to get. Think about it. What is the comparative advantage of your home country?
I think we had lots of policy
but then
we've allowed so much going on better that change.
you consider the fact that
She was running that all up.
building good local technology.
Okay, now, what is the comparative advantage of China? Okay, most of you from China, right? Some of you, at least. What is the comparative advantage of China? Okay?
Population.
But now the population growth is 0 minus now in China. Market.
Market size.
Manufacturing industry, yes, excellent, but are you Chinese? As a Chinese, you must know what is the comparative advantage of your home country? Come on. Unless you tell me you're not Chinese. Huh?
Light industrial product.
Light industrialized product. Yes, that could be light industrialized product. Okay. Need to think about it. Yeah, think about it. Okay. So what is the comparative advantage of the UK?
I was born in Belgium, so.
Come on. You know, they have some of you from local here.
Would be fair to say finance services.
Excellent. So the comparative advantage of UK lies in the financial services, right?
It's held a lot of deliberate national policies as well. So I'm from an area of Coventry, which was massively manufacturing orientated, specifically around car industry. And when policies then changed, there was a massive effect on Coventry as a whole of the nation, or as an area of the nation. So it's sort of like lots of change going very quickly as well. So the deliberate national policies might have superior features in a global competition, but they do have effects like nationally as well.
Yeah. So maybe another national comparative advantage could be used in the automobile industry.
At one point, yeah.
Yeah, and the financial services sector, and these the other two that all of you must know because you've been here since last year, and at least you know it's employment. Excellent. That's another good point. Education, right? You'll come here for education, yeah. So this is a comparative advantage of UK. Another one. You must know, all of you.
The NHS. Well, I don't know. I'm thinking.
Did you have a vaccine? The third jab, the fourth jab. Excellent. That's brilliant point. Pharmaceutical industry. Yeah. NHS is crap. Sorry, it is crap.
It's still free, so it doesn't matter how crap it is. How much money do you pay when you get there?
I would spend my tax to go to pilot.
It's a very difficult conversation to be had there. So it's, the reason it's failing as badly as it is at the moment is arguably down to political intervention and lack of resources.
Yeah, that's the main reason, yeah. Perhaps a few years ago, not like that. Yes, please.
No, it's free. You break your arm, that's it. Turn off.
Waste comes everything else is
You've got like 40 farmers and that's it.
About the, for example, China is
5 pitchfork industries, 5 tractor injuries, and that's all they have to do.
Think about it. So what is the comparative advantage of Colombia? We have someone from Colombia, right? Yeah, unless the lady didn't come.
Yes, she's here.
Okay, sorry.
So we have natural endowments. We have natural endowments. So we have emerald, coffee, oil, iron, natural gas, and sources that we export.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's abundant of natural resources such as oil, gas, coffee, cocoa, has, yeah.
And nickel, and we also have oil.
Oil, yes. Excellent. So,
Emerald, gold.
good. So what is the comparative advantage of Thailand? We have people from Thailand. Yeah? Come on.
The rice.
The rice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
Hospitality.
Housing, excellent. Hospitality as well. Exactly. Tourist hospitality and the rest. Okay. What is the comparative advantage of Malaysia? We have people from Malaysia. Yes.
I used to live in Singapore, which is quite close to Malaysia. Quite a lot of Malaysian influence in Singapore as well. But I know Malaysia personally to be very, very good for its very rich lands. It's very, very beautiful. There's lots of agriculture and what's the word? They export a lot of their. They do any labour that they don't use. They export a lot of their labour as well, which I think is quite a deliberate national policy.
Yeah, labour, agriculture, product, and private tourist industry as well. Yeah, could be because of beautiful islands.
Gorgeous, gorgeous place.
Yeah. So what is the comparative advantage of Lithuania?
Agriculture.
No, what did you say first?
Yeah, so first water. Drinking water.
Drinking water, yeah.
Yeah, from the ground.
Yeah, so mineral water or spring water. Yeah.
Because we export from
Good. That's mineral water or spring water.
Yeah.
So what is the comparative advantage of Norway? Later here? No.
Gas, seafood, oil, gas.
Oil, gas.
seafood, renewable energy.
Yeah, seafood, renewable energy. Good, very good. What about Russia?
Gas.
Maybe
Gas.
gas,
Yeah. Oil and gas.
oil and gas. Yeah. Good. Right. I think I pretty much cover everyone's country, right? So far. Good. So now we have to move on to this concept, competitive advantage. And this is a concept some of you must come across competitive advantage, right? It's also called a firm-specific advantage. It refers to the advantages enjoyed by both countries and firms. See, the difference between competitive and comparative advantage is competitive advantage can be both at firm and country level, whereas comparative advantage is only at country level. Okay? So competitive advantage describe the organizational assets and competencies that are difficult for competitors to imitate, which helps firms succeed in foreign markets. So competitive advantage can take various forms, okay, such as specific knowledge, capability, innovativeness, or could be superior strategies or closer relationship with suppliers and customers. Okay. So competitive advantage is a foundation concept that explains how firms create and sustain distinctive competencies, relative to competitors that leads to superior performance. So I'll give you some examples of competitive advantage. For example, Dell's prowess in the management of its global supply chain. Okay, Samsung's technological leadership of flat panel televisions. We have its Kim Yong here. Oh yes. So sorry, I forgot to cover the comparative advantages of Korea. Do you think?
I think technology can have a competitive advantage.
Technology, yes. Or perhaps I saw very famous company LG, Samsung. They are famous in the consumer electronic industry, perhaps car manufacturers. So this is Samsung's another example of competitive advantage. Samsung's technological leadership in flat panel television, and Cadbury, Cadbury, yeah. Cadbury's capability in international marketing and distribution, and Manila design strength in office furniture. So this is a competitive advantage. It's different from comparative advantage, yeah. So it's at both at firm and country level. Now we have this so-called absolute advantage principle. So the absolute advantage principle argues that a country should only specialize in the product in which it has an absolute advantage or can produce using fewer resources than another country. In other words, countries should focus on their best capability. But to illustrate this absolute advantage principle, let's consider two countries, Germany and France. They engage in a trading relationship. Now it takes an average worker, for example, in France, 6 labor days to produce a ton of clothes and 8 labor days to produce a ton of wheat. So by contrast, it takes an average worker in Germany 10 labor days to produce a ton of clothes and 4 labor days to produce a ton of wheat. If, let's say, Germany and France were to specialize, exchanging wheat and clothes at a ratio of 1:1. So according to this absolute advantage principle, apparently France has the absolute advantage in producing clothes. Okay, so France should employ more of its resources to produce clothes and import all the wheat it needs from Germany, thereby paying only 6 labor days for a ton of wheat. If France had produced the wheat itself, it would have used 8 labor days. So France gained 2 labor days from the trade. Yeah, you're with me, right? And Germany should employ more of its resources to produce wheat and import all its clothes from France, thereby paying only 4 labor days for a ton of clothes. If Germany had produced the clothes itself, it would have used 10 labor days. So Germany gained 6 labor days from the trade. Are you with me? Okay, good. So this is so-called absolute advantage principle. And then we have this so-called comparative advantage principle. Okay, so the comparative advantage principle contains that it's still beneficial for two countries to trade, even if one has an absolute advantage in producing all products. Because what matters most is not the absolute cost of production, but the efficiency with which it can produce. In other words, as long as one country is comparatively more efficient in producing the product needed by the other country. Again, to illustrate this comparative advantage principle, we still use the same two countries, Germany and France, but in a new scenario. Now it takes an average worker in France 8 labor days to produce a ton of clothes and 6 labor days to produce a ton of wheat. Whereas it takes an average worker in Germany, let's say 2 labor days to produce a ton of clothes and 4 labor days to produce a ton of wheat. So apparently Germany has an absolute advantage in producing both items, right? So according to the absolute advantage principle, you might initially conclude that Germany should not trade with France, and Germany should produce both items on its own. Yeah? But this comparative advantage principle argues, although Germany can produce both clothes and wheat more cheaply than France, and it's still beneficial for Germany to trade with France. How can this be true? because what matters most is not the absolute cost of production, but the ratio of production cost between these two countries. So as you can see in this example, Germany is comparatively more efficient in producing clothes than wheat because it can produce 4 times as much clothes as France, but only 1.5 times as much wheat as France. Right? So Germany should focus on producing clothes and import all the wheat it needs from Germany. And France should specialize in producing wheat and import all its clothes from Germany. So in this way, both countries can each produce and consume the product they desire at given level of production cost. Okay, and the implication is, again, as I mentioned, so what matters is the ratio of production cost between two countries. Okay, so for example, Germany should focus on producing clothes and import all the wheat it needs from France, and France should specialize in producing wheat and import all its clothes from Germany. Okay, and each country benefits by specializing in the product in which it has a comparative advantage and import the other product. So this principle applies to all goods. It reveals how countries can use their scarce resources more efficiently. Arguably, for example, no country is better than Japan in making cars and cell phones. But Japan is especially good at making cars. So Japan concentrates all its resources on making cars. So countries such as China and Finland focus on making cell phones. Okay, so in this way, Japan makes maximal use of its resources and the world gets great cars. Okay. However, the comparative advantage principle is optimistic in the sense that the comparative advantage principle initially focuses on natural or inherited resources only, such as favorable climate, arable land, or abundant minerals. So for example, South Africa has a natural abundance of mineral deposits. So it produces and exports diamonds. Okay? Russia, for example, has a vast forest. So it produces and exports wooden products. However, it becomes increasingly clear that countries can also create or acquire comparative advantage. So there is a learning effect out there. So if you consider the case of Japan, in the year following the Second World War, Japan systematically acquired a collection of comparative advantage that benefited its consumer electronic industry. So the investment made by the Japanese government, banks, manufacturing firms paid off enormously. So companies such as Panasonic, Hitachi, and Sony invested massive resources to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to become the world leaders in the consumer electronic industry. So today, Japan accounts for approximately half of the industry's total world production, so including digital cameras, flat panel televisions, and personal computers. So quite recently, South Korea made similar investments, giving rise to leading-edge companies such as LG and Samsung. Okay? So this is the learning effect of comparative advantage. So comparative advantage is not just about natural endowment. Okay? To give you another example of the comparative advantage principle, so it would be wasteful for Saudi Arabia to produce both oil and cars. So instead, it should focus on extracting and refining petroleum products and procuring cars from Japan, who has little natural holding of oil, but manufactures some of the best cars in the world. Okay, so this is another example of the comparative advantage principle. Now, the question is, what are the limitations of these early trade theories? I want you to think about it before I move on.
It can be variable. It can be variable, for example, even if you have minerals, you might not always be in a position to extract it. owing to some other resources being cut down,
It can be
extracted.
extract.
Like for example, it can be variable in the sense that the amount that you can actually extract and use and export and gain the benefits of will vary across the year or across a month.
It varies, right? It varies the amount of resources you can use and consume. So resources are not unlimited in a way. Good. That's a good point. That leads to the further question I want to ask. Okay, think about the phenomena these early trade theories cannot explain, or what factors can actually weaken or eliminate or reduce the comparative advantage in production.
Government policies.
Government policies, yes. That's a good point. Any other point?
Corruption?
Corruption, yes. Anything else? Please. Technology advancement, excellent, can also lower or weaken the weak national comparative advantage in production. So technological advancement can improve the production efficiency, right?
Would geopolitics be an example? So, for example, Russia at the moment holds less of a comparative advantage than they used to simply because of the situation that's
They
going on.
ignore the effect of geopolitical issues and also the pandemic, the natural disasters, yes. So early trade theories tend not to consider this kind of broader effect.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Think about it. And so these are phenomena that early trade theory didn't cover. But another very important aspect in international business is early trade theory cannot explain. And it's related to some of your national comparative advantage and the internationalization. Domestic.
Demand, we don't know demand. We are just comparing by the cost. And then like
Labor. You mean labor?
yeah, by the labor. And
Yes, think about how do you send labor elsewhere? What do you mean? Think about the labor. Think a little bit further. How do we send labor? Can we export labor? Can we? Can't. So how do we export labor? Or how do we internationalize labor? Outsource? No. A little bit further. Okay. So these early trade theories fail to account services. Services cannot be internationalized through import or export. Yeah. So these early trade theories narrowly focus on import and export. Services have to be internationalized through foreign direct investment, right? And also, when we talk about technology, advances in modern communication, internet, facilitate the internationalization of many services at a very low cost. So this can also offset the weak national comparative advantage. And government restrictions such as regulation, policies, or tariffs also can hamper international trade because we know tariffs effectively increase the price of imported products. Okay, making imported products more expensive. This offset the weak national comparative advantage or strong national comparative advantage in production costs. And just as the Japan did, so the government might deliberately target or invest in certain industries, build infrastructures, or provide subsidies, all to boost the competitive advantage of home country firms. Anything else?
it's like why Asia, they had the logistics and infrastructure, but they had low wages. So, for example, in China, in China, they had the logistics and infrastructure, but low wages. Different than South America because they have like political issues and they don't have the infrastructure to produce. So
Political factors.
yeah,
Early trade theories didn't take into account. Yes, we discussed this at the beginning. Yeah. Any other point? That's a good point. Anything else? So what can offset the comparative advantage what factors can offset comparative advantage? These other cases here didn't really cover.
Maybe the help.
Question, is it like comparative advantage is only based, sorry.
You go.
Okay. Comparative advantage is only based on the labor, right?
Or could be anything, could be anything.
It can be variables or it can be anything, or just only labor, what we're talking right now is labor, or like.
It can be anything as long as it's a comparative advantage. What can offset comparative advantage? The strength or weakness. You know, if you're good at certain production, certain product, or if you have natural abundance in certain product, what factors can offset comparative advantage?
Costs, change in the costs
Excellent point.
of like labor and material.
Yeah, so the large scale production can also brings about scale economies, leading to lower prices. This can eliminate the weak or the strong national comparative advantage, right? If you are not good at producing certain product, but you can produce in a large scale that bring down your the cost of production and make your production more efficient.
Do global trends have an influence in comparative national advantage then? So, for example, we're seeing a global trend towards more environmentally conscious business. And then we have examples of certain countries who focus on like the automobile industry, but still quite heavily in petrol powered, diesel powered. Would that global trend of pushing towards EVs, electric vehicles, for example, would that be something that would dampen the comparative advantage of a company that specializes in like petroleum?
I would say this is a competition fact.
It's not a competition factor.
If everyone are doing the same, then it forces you to do the same. Even there's initiative there, but firms do not follow them.
Death of the firm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So think about the motivation for firms or countries to engage in international trade. Motivation. Is that simply just for increased income? But if you think about Japan, it's a small country, right? So Japan is relatively rich. Why does Japan still engage in international trade? For Japanese firms to trade with countries in the UK or elsewhere in Europe, in the United States. So Japan is a rich country already, They don't just want to generate more income just to get out of poverty. That's not enough.
We, like, every country, they want their country to be like incredible in sense of like economy or like social things, and government trying to increase their quality to live like equality or development good and work. And I feel like, for example, comparing one to another product, then which we say like France into Germany, and then one of them is comparatively advantage on clothes, one of them is a belt, and they can only focus on the one case, each of them, and they're like extending it.
Complementarity.
Yeah, and if they're doing it, they can have first the full employment, and second the welfare of like everyone's living equally and like the yeah.
Yeah, complementary is a factor, but think a little bit simple. It's not that complicated. It's very simple. Not as complicated as that. No, it's like Japan is a very small country, right? For Japanese firm, the domestic market is too small. Yeah, so the main motivation to engage in international trade is purely because their home market is too small to support growth of home country firms. Especially like places, Scandinavian countries are the same. They have to internationalize. Otherwise, these small countries wouldn't satisfy the sales target of their home country firms. So that's as simple as that. Yeah. So not just to increase their income, but just because the home country market is too small.
It's not to increase income, no?
increasing.
want to, I think what you said now is to increase income.
Increase
Ultimately,
income
that is the ultimate goal. anyway.
beyond that.
Yeah, we said that the market is too small
Yeah.
to just be in Norway, for instance.
Yeah.
So you go out to earn more money. So it'll be.
We already, in addition to more money, to earn more money.
I just think it is the same.
I think if country is rich enough, it's enough. But if your company, your home market, if you're enough, in a sense, you can self-supply. But in a sense, if you don't just satisfied with your current level of income, but still you can maintain a good living for your current level, but the home market might be too small. Or certain industries, for example, let's say another example is the UK's photovoltaic industry. The photovoltaic industry, you know that, right? Solar power, yeah. So many of the UK companies, because we know in the UK we don't get sunshine very often, yeah. Many of these, UK is especially good at the development of the solar panel. There are many small or large companies, they focus on developing the solar technology. But then, because we don't have enough sunshine, so many of the experiments or like the development of the technology, experimentation, application, the application of this project actually takes place in places like China, because the home country doesn't really have the condition to develop the technology, but the UK firm is especially good at developing the technology. So they develop the application of the technology in countries where there are plenty of sunshine and sell the product to countries like China and Germany or Spain or Thailand or Malaysia that are plenty of sunshine out there. So we call this sort of application called proof of concept project. Normally takes place in overseas countries, but initial development is based in the UK. So this is an example why they internationalize. So home country doesn't really have the environment and market for this particular product, but still this company is selling the product, this particular product. Does that make sense? No? So which part you don't understand?
I didn't understand your question and answer it.
Sorry?
What is the, okay, beyond the income, what is the next one? What is the next?
The home country's market is too small to support
Okay,
the
the
growth.
demand.
Sorry?
The demand. Like, there's no market, okay, they need to go.
Yes,
down.
no market, no condition for the development of the technology. So the technology development has to move to other countries. And there's even domestic customer who has a need for demand for this kind of product, because in the UK, if you want to, rarely we don't have any opportunity to use solar panel, right? Because we don't get sunshine. But if a UK company develops solar technology, they have to sell their product to countries where you can use solar panel.
Okay, then second one is the demand. Like,
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because anyone who doesn't understand.
So in that case, will the process efficacy also be a part of a competitive advantage?
Sorry?
Like the process efficacy, like how they are building a product, the process in which they are building a product. So in that case, that should also be a competitive advantage, because although they are not able to test it in their home country, so if it's a good product, it can be tested in a different country.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. No questions? Are you clear now? Yeah? Good. So I think we covered the limitations. Now the question for all of you is, what would happen if countries do not trade with each other? They completely shut the door, they self-produce and self-supply. What would happen? You can discuss with your neighbors. Think carefully what would happen. Now you learned early trade theory. We discussed the limitations. What would happen if countries do not trade with each other? You can think about the lockdown as a hypothetical scenario, but I don't want to mislead you because the lockdown didn't last long.
But we don't.
Yes, I think it's a good example. Where the
Don't think about the scenario. Just think about two countries not treated this way. What would happen? Think about that.
That's right. It takes a long time to make soil
Things that we have produced.
I'm getting really it's asking me.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why there's policy incentivizing encouraging domestic production. So the next slide,
This is part of the
on international trade itself.
No, it's there, right? I'm actually the way so what you guys talk about is knowing this game. The stipulation is for integrated. Okay, so having we don't have to do this all the time.
I answered what would happen if countries self-produce, self-supply, they completely shut the Gulf, do not trade with other countries, what would happen?
Japan gave a good go.
There is no growth.
In like the early 1900s, Japan gave a good go. They had like a cultural lockdown, and I think the only people that were allowed, so the only other nation that was allowed to trade with Japan was a very small select of Dutch traders. This is a long time ago, and it was basically the leader of Japan wanted to go through some kind of cultural revolution, and it found that it economically stagnated the country quite drastically, and I think within like 40 years they were then back to a free trade agreement. But they gave it a good go. So,
Interesting story.
yeah, so
The economy would be.
the economy eventually shrunk to a point where it reached an equilibrium of it wasn't able to grow anymore, but it was still requiring a lot of investment in order to meet the needs of people. People obviously get used to a certain type of lifestyle after they become accustomed to it, and then if you take that away from them, it can cause friction.
There's no economic development anymore.
Yeah, that is essentially it.
Any other answers?
There could be some sort of crisis as well. For example,
Crisis.
yes, because for example, like if you want Swiss chocolate, the cocoa beans ultimately go from Ghana, so that stops. You don't get any more Swiss chocolate.
Yeah, so you wouldn't get a product you want. Yeah.
One example of that used to be Venezuela. Is one of the 5 countries with more oil, but when the government was anti-democratic, they never produce food. They don't have any agriculture. So now, since this, they even if they have money, they don't have food because they don't have any agriculture, anything.
Yeah. So
Because all the doors in Latin America they closed, they are not selling them, so they are struggling just even for food.
Yeah, no food. Eventually no food. Even you have the money, but there's no food. And there will be crisis, right?
Because they don't produce any food.
Yeah, because the food, you mean, why they don't produce any food?
Because they used to buy all the food to Colombia and Brazil. They used to export because their business was the oil company.
Yeah, so import from other countries.
So it was based in
Yeah, that's very good point. Yeah, that's very good point.
in Cuba too. They have problems with meat because they have a
So,
lot.
so they don't have any food because they don't produce food. So they tend to import from other countries.
Yes, but it's difficult because of the
Yeah. Any other points? Think a little bit further. What if there's no food? What would happen?
You're hungry.
If people are hungry, what will they do?
political crisis.
Crime. They'll be crime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going straight for him.
So there will be wars. If the people don't have food, they're hungry. There'll be crime or there'll be wars. Or like you said, if countries rely heavily on imports, if they don't trade with other resources, eventually will be exhausted. Yeah, there'll be wars and resources will be exhausted eventually. Okay. So you need to push your thinking a little bit further. Yeah. Now, how do countries enhance their competitive advantage? Now, first let's have a look at what is so-called the competitive advantage of nations. So when a nation has abundance of comparative advantage in a given industry, and the firms in that industry collectively have abundant competitive advantages, that nation has national competitive advantage in that particular industry. So that's why at the beginning of the session, I asked you to think about the famous multinational firms, famous product or services. So what is the national competitive advantage of your own country? What is the national competitive advantage of your own country?
Is cheap labor a competitive advantage?
Cheap, you mean?
Labor.
Labor cost.
Labor
Low
cost.
level labor cost.
National competitive advantage is different.
No, I just asked about regular competitive.
Okay. Think about the national competitive advantage. Think about the comparative advantage of your country. And think about firms in that particular industry. You know, collectively have, for example, low cost advantage. Yeah. For example, the UK has a national competitive advantage in the prescription drug industry because of its many first-class pharmaceutical companies such as GlaxoSmithKline and AstraZeneca.
So would you say that something like education is what leads into that? So, for example, the UK is very heavily based in like pharmaceuticals and service level economy as well, in like PwC and so on.
Yeah.
So would you say that having a strong national, I've forgotten the word for it already, there's a strong national policy push for heavy education. So, for example, UK, you can't leave education before you're 18. You can't. You have to do some form of higher education, whether that be an apprenticeship or university, college, etc.
Policy-wise, I think this is not specific policy just to develop the education industry. As far as I know, countries such as China even have strict policy towards education.
Of course, yeah.
But think about specific, features of that particular industry that is unique.
I'm just trying to apply it to Britain. I can't think of like a wholesale national.
Probably lies in the educational system. Educational system. Financial. Yeah, financial is different. Think about the USD in example. So what is the competitive advantage, national competitive advantage of China or United States?
Can I ask, for example, is there national competitive advantage if I'm from Mongolia, if our community is in Amazon people? Is that the
Sorry, I can't hear you clearly. I need to come up because it's always problem hearing you.
The fact that we even have a strong financial system of services
Can you be a
because
little
we
bit
have
loud
to
so
make
everyone
every
can hear?
country with one
is that the national competitive advantage?
adhere to our financial regulations.
It's
true though. I mean, if you talk to that, yeah.
That's exactly the answer.
So there you go. That's why I keep asking these questions. To see. What is the marketing? That is a little bit interesting. Yeah, fair enough. Did you find it interesting?
Think about the technical.
That's weird. I'm in a group with Jared, and he's doing Pubic history and now he's doing marketing. Jared's
No, think about the definition. According to the definition, you identify not just the broad line everywhere has a broad line.
Yeah, I
You need to develop famous company, famous product out of that. You're not building it. It's just
no, this is a,
also, we have the discussion afterwards.
fantastic.
Sorry. We have the discussion afterwards.
This was huge.
I need to
I did business.
Okay, so I'm asking questions, the comparative advantage of China, United States. Any answer? The competitive advantage of countries different from if your country just has broad land but then you don't take advantage of it, then it's irrelevant resources, yeah? It has to, your natural resources or your advantage has to be applied. You have to take advantage of your, abundant land or fertile land, and you need to develop that, use that in the development of your product services. Otherwise, it's just useless resources, really.
So, for example, with the US having quite a heavy soybean, I know they export a massive amounts of soybean. Would you say that the national competitive advantage for those farmers is that they have very fertile land suited for soybean?
Exactly. So the national competitive advantage of the United States lies in the agricultural product and processed food, and also services, as well as high-tech manufacturing. Yes. So think about not just the natural resources. Think about how companies take advantage of these natural resources or the natural resources of your country. Please.
Me?
You have a question, right?
Yeah, I was just wondering if that was, for instance, how Norway has a lot of resources for like this renewable energy, then having already established infrastructure and educated people, that would be the competitive advantage?
Yes, that would be, yes. That's the national competitive advantage of Norway. Exactly. Yeah.
Is US dollar competitive advantage? Is US dollar a competitive advantage for US?
No.
But in a way.
No, you think about the companies in the financial industries. So it's not.
Okay.
It's not a competitive advantage.
I think it's more of a social advantage. It's
economic advantage.
It is an economic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. If you still cannot figure out the national competitive advantage of your home country, don't worry. I'm going to introduce an important analytical framework for you to identify the national competitive advantage of your home country. Okay? So it's so-called Porter's diamond. It has 4 different dimensions. Did you ever come across Porter's diamond before?
The Porter's 5 forces.
Yes? 5 forces, but not diamond. Okay. All right. So it has 4 different dimensions. One of these dimensions, for example, is demand conditions, which refer to the strength and sophistication of demands of customers at home. Okay. For example, Japan is a densely populated and hot and humid country with very demanding customers. So these conditions led Japan to become one of the leading producers of superior and compact air conditioners. Okay, and then we have the related and supporting industries actually indicate the presence of suppliers, complementary firms, and competitors that excel within the given industry. For example, Silicon Valley is a great place to launch a software company because it's home to thousands of knowledgeable workers and companies in the software industry. And then we have the factor conditions. Factor conditions define a nation's position in factors of production. Remember, what are factors of production? I mentioned in the first lecture, what are factors of production? Yeah, labor, capital, technology, land, entrepreneurship, innovation, so on. People, the resources people to produce and product or economic output. So, for example, Germany's abundance of workers with strong engineering backgrounds has propelled Germany to a commanding height in the global engineering and design industry. Okay, an abundance of cost-effective and well-educated workers give China a competitive advantage in the production of laptop computers. Okay. And finally, form strategy, structure, and reverie actually refer to the nature of domestic reverie and the conditions in a nation that determine how forms are created, organized, and managed. Okay. So, for example, the presence of strong domestic competitors actually help countries create and maintain national competitive advantage. So Italy has many top companies in design industries such as fashion, lighting, textile, and furniture. So vigorous domestic rivalry puts these companies under constant pressure to innovate, so which has propelled Italy to a leading position in design worldwide. So this is form, strategy, structure, and rhetoric. So these are 4 different dimensions precisely. And you can use this analytical framework to identify the competitive advantage of your home country or other countries. Right. Now, how do government influence international trade? So do you want to have a break for 3 to 4 minutes? Yeah?
The films you'll always be able to find. I did this when I was after a few years. I still love it. Honestly, embrace tradition, protect tradition. If you're going to kill yourself, do it. You can't stand That's 13. Yeah, 13-year-old girl. She had a 4 degree. I'm quite fortunate both my sisters. Well, one of my sisters is a mum, so she lives with us. So the other one is she's a bit like me. I'm going to smoke. I don't want to do nice and liquid go. I'm gonna go for cigarettes. It'll be interesting. They go too
Well, you for 3 years. Yeah. No, I told my yeah, very different place to you. No. Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, no. No, it's September start. 3 months ago, which is a bit so and keep
Right, let's move on, let's get started again. So how do governments influence international trade? So precisely, there are various instruments of government intervention. So believe we all know tariffs, right? A tariff is a tax or duty imposed on imported product or sometimes might be on exported product. So tariffs effectively increase the cost of acquisition for customers. Okay? And tariff also discourage import or export? Any of them? Do you think tariff discourage import or export? Import, yes. But tariff is an important source of government revenue. Okay? So it's very common when we buy imported products such as laptop computers or textiles, the prices we pay cover tariffs. Okay? So some countries even impose tariffs on the export product by their home country first. So for example, Russia charged a duty on oil export with the intention of generating government revenue and maintaining high oil stocks within Russia. Okay? And then we have a non-tariff trade barrier. It's the government policy or regulation or procedure that impacts international trade through means other than explicit tariff. An often used form of non-tariff trade barrier is a quota, which is a quantitative restriction placed on the import of specific products over a specific period of time, such as US import of Japanese cars. Okay? The disadvantage of a quota is it gives other importers the monopoly power to charge higher prices, but it harms the late importers and often lead to higher prices for the buyers. So quotas are therefore the most straightforward denial of comparative advantage. So for example, the textile industry in advanced economies has been temporarily protected for about 40 years. Until 2005, in January 2005, when textile quotas were first lifted, so China's comparative advantage in textiles immediately shot. So the number of Chinese t-shirts and trousers exported to the United States rose more than 1,000%. So in the second quarter of 2005, both the United States and the EU slapped quotas on Chinese textile again. Okay, so this is a quota. So sometimes government intervention may target at certain operations of foreign firms using investment barriers. So this is very common, when countries want to restrict the foreign direct investment or the flow of FDI from foreign countries by restricting the operations of foreign firms in their own countries. And it's common in the national strategic industries in most countries, such as Mexico's oil industry, China's automobile industry, and India's retail industry. So in these national strategic industries, foreign firms can only enter these industries through joint venture with one or more local partners. And in the joint venture between foreign and local firms, foreign firms are not allowed to own more than 49% of the share of the joint venture. So in other words, the key decision-making right always belongs to the local partners. So this is an example of investment barriers. Okay? By restricting the investment foreign firm in national strategic industry and the share they can hold. And we then have the subsidies. Subsidies are government grants to a firm or group of firms to ensure their survival and success. So subsidies effectively lower the production cost for firms. Okay? Subsidies therefore encourage exports. Okay? So subsidies include grants, tax breaks, infrastructure construction, or government contract at inflated prices. Okay? So for example, Turkey gives export subsidies to up to 20% to Turkey's producers of wheat and sugar. Okay? And both the EU and the United States provide huge agricultural subsidies to the farmers. And especially the EU pays the difference between the guaranteed minimum price and the world market price. Okay? So unfortunately, you can no longer receive any agricultural subsidies from the EU government. This is perhaps one of the costs of Brexit. Yeah? And then we have the local content requirement, our requirement that a certain proportion of the value of the product made in one country originate from that country. For example, approximately 50% of cars assembled in Venezuela must be made from parts or other input originally produced in Venezuela. Okay? The local content requirement actually discourage the import of raw materials and parts and components which harm manufacturers' sourcing option. So in many cases, local content requirements lead to low product quality but higher prices for the buyers.
Would that also incorporate sort of legislation such as, I think in Thailand, you have to have a certain percentage of your board be Thai resident, Thai nationals by default, and if they're not, then you can't set up as a company?
It's investment barrier.
Yeah, that's an investment barrier.
Investment
Okay,
barrier,
that's
yes.
fair enough. Yeah.
I think that's a good example. And administrative practices are bureaucratic rules that make it harder to import foreign products. So for example, since 2008, the United States has tightened the requirement to label the origin of pigs and pork products originally imported from Canada and cause Canada to appeal to the WTO, as later on we'll see in our case today. And Russia, for example, imposed extensive inspections and bureaucratic procedures on the import of alcoholic beverage. And so administrative practices slow the import of foreign products, hamper or delayed foreign investment activities. And finally, we have the anti-dumping duties. Anti-dumping duties are costs levied on imports that have been dumped. That means selling below production costs to deliberately drive domestic firms out of business. Okay? So anti-dumping duties effectively eliminate or reduce the competitive advantage of imported product price at abnormally low level. So for example, the United States imposed anti-dumping duties on the import of local steel to support the US-based steel manufacturers. Okay? So an anti-dumping duty, in fact, is a frequently used, a powerful instrument in international trade. Okay? Now I'm going to introduce a very important theory or theoretical perspective in international trade that you must know at postgraduate level. So if you come out of today's session and do not know what is institution-based view, and don't tell others you're my students, okay? So there are several key concepts in institution-based view of international business. So first, formal institutions. So what are formal institutions? Formal institutions are rules, regulations, and laws set by the authorized bodies, normally governments or their delegated bodies. Sometimes could be supranational organizations, such as the European Union or WTO. The foreign and domestic firms failing to meet government rules or regulations will have to pay fine, are disqualified from government contract. Informal institutions are rules that are not formalized but exist, such as norms, values, cultures, and ethics. So for example, employees might feel uncomfortable with organizational wrongdoing, but there has also been a norm not to rock the boat. The whistleblowers have to overcome the norms that encourage silence and follow one's own personal beliefs. Okay? So what do institutions do? Actually, before you know what the institutions do, you need to know the institutional framework. So the institutional framework governing a particular context is made up of formal and informal institutions governing individual and firm behavior. Okay? So this is so-called institutional framework. So what do institutions do? Reduce uncertainty. What happened? What happened, you know? Okay, so what do institutions do? Reduce uncertainty. Now, uncertainty can be devastating. For example, an economic uncertainty such as the fear that a partner might fail to carry out its obligations might lead to economic losses. Okay? So uncertainty reduces people's willingness to make long-term commitment or any commitment at all. So this has actually a devastating effect during the 2008 global financial crisis. Banks were so worried another bank will go bust. So they virtually stopped lending to each other, even for short-term loans. So the interbank lending dropped dramatically during that period. Uncertainty also increases transaction costs. which is defined as costs associated with economic transaction. Okay? Transaction costs increases if businesses believe that others might behave opportunistically, which is defined as self-interest seeking behavior with guilt, such as cheating or misleading or confusing other parties in a transaction. Okay? So informal institutions can effectively reduce the potential for opportunistic behavior by explicitly establishing the rules of the game so that violation can be mitigated with ease. So institutions are not static, they evolve over time. So institutional transition is a comprehensive and fundamental change introduced to the formal and informal rules of the game that affect companies as players. Okay, so such institutional transition is very common in countries, especially some emerging market countries, especially those moving from central planning for market competition, such as China, Poland, and Russia, where institutional transition has been so pervasive in these countries, and these countries are simply called transition economies. Okay, I'm sure you might come across transition economies. But they're not the same thing with emerging economies, yeah? They might be overlapped, but they're not the same thing. Transaction economy focuses on the institution, formal informal institution chain. The emerging economy tends to have a faster economic growth rate. So this is the institution-based view of international business. And now you can read your case, okay? I think I passed through some of the case here. And you can also access online. There are hard copies here as well. I printed out the thank you. So on the back.
No, I think I'm choosing. Oh, nice. That's a good. One ten. It's nice.
My mum, I did next when I was younger, so I was like used to a lot of shooting, like stuff like that. Oh, nice. And so to balance that out, my mum was like.
And if you finish reading the case, you can discuss the questions with your neighbor. And we also need to move on a little bit quickly because I'm going to talk about formative coursework. Yeah?
I've read it twice.
There's nothing else.
There's nothing in the information to suggest why the talk is such. You okay?
Yeah, that's quite similar.
So that's far away from making it. It's still in the same.
Yeah.
Water. I don't know, but it stresses me.
I think because it's so much actual water. Savory bacon pancake.
I'm not a big sweet guy. A little bit.
Savory pancakes, a little bit of bacon. Yeah. I was initially, oh my goodness. Yeah. No.
No, it's just. I've been doing this for a few years now. I will ask this, so the questions don't necessarily link to, so in the main body of the text, it doesn't necessarily discuss why the Canadian post have such a large market share in the US. So obviously you can infer that because 76% of Canadian exports make up a quarter of their own GDP is then attributed to the American market. It doesn't quite suggest that that's the exact reasons why they hold such a large market share in the US, aside from the fact that they're just closely related. Unfortunately, I commute from Colchester, so the trains have been very shocking about this week. Yeah.
Are you talking about the
I did watch the lecture. I recall that actually. Yeah, the trading one. Okay, so it's linked to the.
When you talk about early trade theories, are you referring to Adam Smith? And, okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, oh, Adam Smith you're talking about, okay. But surely it's all rooted in their social form or other, but obviously now things are stuck.
It's also linked by economics.
Yeah. Okay.
That's where I'm getting confused.
Okay. So I've got to try and move away from my actual stuff then.
So have you finished reading? Okay.
Yeah,
So what about the first question? why do Canada and the United States have the largest bilateral trading relationship in the world? Why?
Undefended border, and also Canada provides crude oil to the US.
Yes.
And the undefended border.
Yes, in a sense, but still there are borders, although it's not very hard border. In a sense.
Is it due to the nature of their trading relationship, having very few taxes and bureaucracy?
Excellent, that's the point. So as I explained in the fourth lecture, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, they are all North American Free Trade Agreement countries, right? So there's an economic bloc between Canada, United States, and Mexico. So there's tariff-free, yeah? Between these two countries, there are no non-tariff barriers. And that's why they have a largest bilateral trading relationship. Now, the second question, why do Canadian products have such a large market share in the US? Why? Why do Canadian products have such a large market share? Why not Chinese products? Why not British products? Okay? That's brilliant point. Because of the geographic proximity between these two countries, yeah? So the transportation cost is much cheaper than product imported from elsewhere like the UK, China, or Colombia, yeah? Or Mongolia. Please.
But at the same time, this year the same rule with the Mexico. So why they fail there and dispute there? So it's only not factor like we are just discussing some parcel things here. I think.
That's a good question.
And more or less in every aspect we are discussing like that only.
Yeah.
So we are not talking about the ecosystem. We are just dealing with something.
Think about what we covered in the first lecture. What helps economic bloc succeed?
So the same rule applies with the Mexico.
Yes, that's why I'm saying think about what factors help regional integration succeed. Think about cultural and linguistic similarity. I already give an example. Under the North American Free Trade Agreement, it's much easier for a Canadian firm to establish trade and investment relationship in the United States than in Mexico. Why this? Why? Cultural and linguistic similarities. Yeah. So for example, it's easier for people living here, if you're from Scandinavian countries, you speak similar language, right? Although not entirely the same, but similar culture. And if you're from Mongolia or Japan or South Korea, more likely you might buy some food from China and South Korea. They are very similar. Yeah. So you tend to prefer buy the product.
There are multiple factors even while we are discussing about the comparative advantage. We are leaving so many the parcel things. We are not completing, so we are just focusing on one part. I don't understand those things.
So sorry, can you?
Yeah, I'm saying in every aspect, in every concept, we are discussing this parcel part, and we are just wasting time. I feel like that.
You're talking about.
We are not covering the whole aspect of the things
You will only focus on specific aspect, yes.
Yeah, we are always biased in every concept. So it's really hard to grab the things how to move on.
Well, but we have a main reason why. Why Canadian product has such a big market share in the US.
I'm telling you this one aspect. So what I feel I'm sharing that. I don't know.
Perhaps we'll have discussion afterwards, yeah? Okay, because I can't hear you well, understand what you're trying to say clearly. If you understand, can you repeat his question for me? But if not, then we can have a discussion after the class, okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So the last question. Well, 80% of the Canada and US trade flows smoothly. Trade disputes only affect the remaining 2%. Some argue that the Canadians have overreacted in this case. What do you think?
I think 2% of 560 billion is still quite a bit of money.
Still quite a lot.
It's just over $1 billion.
Okay. So you still think if it's percentage, but in the real money is quite a lot, right? Any other question? Any other answers? Actually, any other opinion or points?
If
if Canada just suffer in silence, maybe we will happen again on other industries. So
Yes, okay. Think a bit further. You're nearly there. Think a little bit further. So if you think about the 2% in the overall economies, it's not a big number, but if you break it down in terms of different sectors, especially in terms of the agriculture sector, for farmers, 2% of the overall economy is quite a lot. Yeah?
11 billion.
Yes, 11 billion, but in terms of individual sector, it's a lot. It's not just 2%, perhaps 98%. Yeah? So you need to look at different levels of analysis. Yeah? 2% is only at macro level, overall economy. But if you look at 2% break down into individual sectors, it's quite a much more than 2%. Okay?
So the impact for the specific industries that is it.
Exactly. So for specific industry, 2% is allowed, not just overall 2%. It could be 98% or 20% or 50%.
It's quite conceivable that 11 billion is like, near enough the entire industry.
So do you have any questions or different opinions? Okay, so let's move on to our formative coursework. So you read your formative coursework, right? You have read your formative coursework. So analyze the multinational enterprise home country and host country of your choice. Here you are required to select the multinational firm and its home and host country. The focus is mainly the home country institutional environment that might affect your chosen multinational firm's host country operations. So this includes both formal institutional environment and informal institutional environment. So provide analysis of strengths and opportunities of the home country institutional environment on your chosen multinational firm's operations in the host country in 2022. It must be focusing on 2022. Illustrate your answer with any one multinational firm that satisfies the following requirement. The home country of your selected company must be an advanced or developed economy. And the host country of your selected company must be an emerging economy. In the analysis, you have to focus on two of the four suggested aspects, including CSR, product offering, organizational structure, and foreign entry strategy of your chosen multinational firm's host country operations. So, as you know, in the first lecture, formative coursework doesn't account for anything. But it's an important opportunity to help you actually develop your summative coursework. So the deadline is by 3 p.m. 19th of July, and the word limit is 750 words plus 10% variation. You also need to deliver an executive summary. It shouldn't be more than 100 words, and this is outside your 750 word limit. And so how do I write the executive summary? Executive summary is precisely a summary of the key points from your essay. Okay, so without reading your coursework, if I only read your executive summary, I wouldn't know what is the research question you're trying to address. What are the key points arising from your analysis? So very brief and precise. Yeah. So if you're writing a paper, sometimes people can include the method in half sentence they use, or include the key theories they use in analysis. But all these can be very short, no more than one sentence. Yeah. So the executive summary in the context of formative coursework and summative coursework is what is the question you're trying to address, and what are your key findings, and that's it. Okay. Now it's different from introduction. The introduction is like a roadmap. Yeah. You need to provide you need to provide a roadmap for your potential readers. The introduction is the entrance to your essay. By reading your introduction, I wouldn't know the key point of your analysis or your findings. So please use appendices wherever possible. And this is a good opportunity to showcase your excellent stats research and detective work you have done for your essay. Okay, I'll definitely read your appendices. Okay, so what will we look for? So first, your compliance with the coursework brief accounts for 10%, and your analysis and evaluation for the macro environment accounts for 40%. And your identification of threats and opportunities account for 20%, and the use of sources and evidence account for another 20%, and finally, presentation reference accounts for the final 10%. So you need to use the Harvard referencing style. Yeah, at your level, you should know. Yeah. So how do I define? So you must know what is a developed or advanced economy. Yeah. So a developed or advanced economy is a country with highly developed economy, enhanced technological infrastructure relative to other less industrialized nations. So the criteria we use to differentiate advanced economy from other type of economies are gross domestic product and gross national product or national standard of living. Okay, so there are plenty examples of an advanced economy. For example, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So these, and also most of the Western European countries, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, or Luxembourg, or in Asia, Japan, South Korea, South Africa, and these are all examples. South Africa is not advanced economy, sorry. But yeah, Japan, South Korea, they are all examples of advanced economies. Whereas a developing economy is a country with a lower standard of living, underdeveloped industrial base, and low human development index relative to other countries. And so examples are some African countries, Angola, Ethiopia, Zambia, or Somalia, or Ghana, maybe North Korea. Yeah, another example, North Korea, or Algeria. Okay, and what is an emerging economy? It's a country that has some characteristic of an advanced or developed market, but does not meet standard to be a developed market. This includes countries that might be developed market in the future or in the past, such as the BRIC countries. You know the BRIC countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, Mexico, Turkey, South Africa, Malaysia. Yeah. So these are all examples of developing economies. Or Colombia is another example of emerging market. Yeah. So these are what are so-called advanced developing or emerging markets. Now, how do I find the firm? You can have a look at the Fortune 500 or Financial Times 500 companies, or you can Google multi-divisional firm or M firm. So immediately a list of multinational firms will come up, and you can choose a company of your interest. Or alternatively, you can have a look at the list of Fortune 500 firms 2021 uploaded on Blackboard. The latest ranking 2022 hasn't come out yet. Okay, and choose a company that you're interested in and use your detective work to try and establish its organizational structure, product offerings, CSR strategies, and foreign entry strategies. And then have a look at their annual report or corporate financial report or their official corporate website, and pay attention to places such as auction news release or press release. So these are the locations where you are more likely to find strategic decisions or operational decisions that affect the entire company, especially the host country operations. So the news release or press release, so this kind of location tend to document archive information of the company, especially the key events. Alternatively, you can have a look at the company's Facebook or Twitter account. Yeah, so you're more likely to find historical information, archive information of the company, especially the key events, the operational decisions that are made affect the company's foreign operations. So then you need to build the context of your study and set the perspective or angle of your analysis. So you can consider yourself as a regional executive of a multinational firm or international business analyst who are asked to advise on the opportunities or threats or the impact of your chosen firm's home country formal and informal institutions on its host country operations. So desirably, you could have the following structure. So first, you could have an introduction session where you describe the background information of your chosen firm, such as its age, size, geographic reach, its home country, and the main sectors is in, or if you wish, growth and profitability. But try to be brief and precise. Remember, you only have 750 words. You need to use your word limit effectively. And then you could dedicate a session called the home country formal institutional environment, where you review the government policies, rules, or regulations or laws in the home country of your chosen multinational firm, and pay attention to the differences in formal institutions that could affect your chosen firm's host country operation. For example, if your chosen firm, well, your chosen multinational firm is the advanced economy, so CSR laws in advanced economy tend to be more strict than emerging economies, which is your chosen firm's host country. So this means when expanding to the host country, your chosen firm might either choose or uphold high ethical standard as it does in the home country. So the advantage could be it helps your chosen firm build a credible reputation as a globally responsible firm. But of course, it's expensive. Doing so is expensive in host countries. Alternatively, your chosen firm could just follow some basic ethical standard, yeah? Although this kind of strategy is very cheap, but the risk is, or the threat is, it might tarnish or jeopardize your chosen firm's reputation as a socially responsible firm at home country. So this is an example how you discuss threats and opportunities using variations between host and home country formal institutional environments. Yeah, and likewise, you could have another session called the home country informal institutional environment, where you review the informal institutional environment of your chosen firm's home country and pay particular attention to the cross-cultural risk that might either pose a challenge or threat to your chosen firm's host country operations, especially cultural variations means that you might change your product offerings in host country or not. Yeah. So finally, you could conclude your essay with a summary of the disadvantages or in terms of advantages, opportunities, and threats of your home country's formal and informal institutional environment on your chosen firm's host country operations. So I have provided you with a potential structure of your coursework. So what happens if the structure of my formative coursework looks totally different? It doesn't matter at all, as long as you meet the coursework requirements. Yeah. So again, presentation matters. Try to have a content page and page your essay. So these are all outside your word limit, not included in the word limit. And use session headings or subheadings, yeah, to be clear in your structure. Do not have essay with no headings at all, yeah. And to be clear, in your thinking and writing, try to have a main sentence in each paragraph, and be concise and clear. Okay. Use tables, diagrams, charts wherever possible. But as long as you're using the tables, chart, or diagrams, you do need to make sure you refer to these tables, diagram in text. Okay? And use these tables and diagrams to substantiate your opinion, your argument, and your point. Otherwise, there's no point using them. And this is also an important opportunity to showcase that you actually use evidence and sources in order to meet the marking criteria. Okay, so that's everything. Do you have any questions? And if, by the way, if you're not sure about your selection of multinational firm and its host and home country, you can email me. And I'll make sure you're on track. Yeah? Okay, so I'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. So they have to have operations with that country. Okay, so what's the point then? I have to show them what that is.
Yes, yes.
But they should know that they are already in that market. Yeah, I thought I have to choose something and suggest. So, no, I thought I have to choose the country and suggest and say what could be the possible risk.
Export, doesn't factor so much like the formal institution. The company needs to actually operate in that country.
Okay.
In order to be a factor that certain some regulation.
Yeah, and then you have to show how it can get.
Because if they export to a foreign country, they just don't need to consider anything. They can outsource that service to the export agency.
So what's the issue for me? For I should review the possible.
Identify, as I said, if there's a variation between the present home country regulation or policies and the host country policies. There's huge difference. And
So what does host country mean in this?
Emerging market country, for example, you choose a company originally from the UK, yeah, and then operating in countries like South Africa.
But they have to operate in that.
They have to operate, otherwise you couldn't discuss the coursework, especially in terms of foreign entry strategies. If you export, you don't have a specific strategy.
I mean, in a way you can export and operate in that.
Oh yeah, you can, but you have to operate. You could both export and operate, but at bottom line is you have to have operations in that country, not necessarily import export.
Okay, I see.
And also you have to, if your company only export import, you're not much affected by you wouldn't be able to discuss the.
But in a way you are affected if something changes.
But you can't discuss organizational structure and CSR strategies.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
I understand that. Thank you.
Good. Do you know that lady sitting out there? Are you in the same program?
I'm in global business.
Oh, you're my. Okay, do you know that lady, Mongolian lady?
Yeah.
She's from our.
No.
Oh, okay. Can you understand her question?
No, not really.
I couldn't understand, and she's very confused, and I'm trying to help, but I couldn't understand her questions, and that's why I asked anybody can understand.
It's okay, maybe next time.
Yeah, and also the guy sitting far away there. Do you know him?
The Indian guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
You know it's from our program, no?
I'm not sure. I don't think he's from our.
No. So can you understand his question? I don't. Sorry, thank you, but.
It's okay. Here's the.
Yeah, I'll ask them. You can ask them to stay, but they just left.
Okay, thank you.
And you're welcome. You're very welcome. I'll see you next week. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.